good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Chapter 36, Population Ecology. Chapter 35, we talked about animal behavior. We're going to move on from my most favorite topic, animal behavior, to my second most favorite topic, population ecology. Let's define this idea of a population. A population is a group of individuals of the same species found in the same habitat. The idea of a habitat is the normal part of nature where that species would be found. It could be the tree canopy, it could be the forest floor, it could be fast-moving streams, it might be saltwater marshes, freshwater marshes, habitat. The normal part of nature where that species, that organism is found. If they are of the same species, then individuals will rely on the same resources. They will be influenced by the same environment because they're a population. The population is a group of individuals in one particular area, which means they've got to, like I said, they have to rely on the resources of that area. They're influenced by the environmental conditions of that area, and they are likely to interact and interbreed. That's what a population means. In the same area, using the same resources, and interacting with one another. That's what a population means. Population density is the number of individuals within a given area. Now we're not just saying, hey, the number of deer in that forest. We're saying the number of white-tailed deer in this 200 square mile forest. All right, population density. And it's, like I said, it's the number of individuals per square mile. We'll talk more about how population density impacts a species or a population. As a general rule, the more dense a population becomes, the more chances you have for problems. But then again, the less dense it is, you can also have problems too. If it's too sparsely populated. So there's kind of a happy medium, a so-called butter zone, where population density is good, and higher than that is bad, and lower than that is bad. Population ecology is the study of how the population size will changes, and the factors that will regulate that change. Not how an individual interacts with the ecosystem that interacts with the environment, it's how the entire population of individuals interact with the environment. You can understand one person interacting within a forest is going to have limited impact, whereas 50 people interacting with the forest can have much greater impact. So population ecology, how does this particular population, number of individuals, how do they impact the environment, and then that's very, very dependent upon their density. While talking about populations, we talk about individuals, density of the population, we also want to talk about dispersion patterns. Dispersion patterns are how do the organisms group themselves within their natural habitat. You might think that they are random. You might think that most populations, the individuals are randomly spread throughout their habitat. And the fact of the matter is that's very uncommon. As a matter of fact, that is rare. It is rare that individuals will be randomly dispersed within a population. The individuals will, there are three dispersion patterns. The first one is clumped, and clumped is actually by far the most common dispersion pattern that we're going to see. They're going to be clumped around a resource, and that resource, it depends on what is the limited resource in the area. It could be suitable nesting sites. It could be water availability. It's actually very often water availability. It could also have everything to do with some other limited resource, a nutrient in the soil, or availability of sunlight from plants. Very, very common, most common method of dispersion. In this picture here, we can see there's this large, rolling hills, grasslands all over the place, and we see a group of bison. How are the bison spread throughout this picture? Are they randomly spread throughout the picture, or are they clumped? You have a major population of them, a big grouping of them right here, and a few more spread out there. We see huge areas where there just simply aren't any bison. Animals tend to clump together, especially prey animals will tend to clump together because prey animals will clump together for safety. Same thing with these swans that we see over here, where there's obviously they've got to be in a large lake. And where are they? Are they spread randomly throughout the lake? No, they're clumped together in a flock. They're stuck together for the most part. Safety, we talked about that, the selfish herd hypothesis, safety numbers. But anyway, they're clumped together. Same thing with these fish. Are the fish randomly spread throughout the water, or are they in a group together? Are they clumped together? These pretty flowers. Again, are they randomly spread throughout the environment, or are they clumped together in one area? Clumped together in one area. The reason why we often find plants specifically clumped together in one area is exemplified by an old saying, and that is that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. When we hear that saying, we take it to mean, oh, well, a child is going to be just like the parent. But the honest definition, the honest explanation of the apple doesn't fall far from the tree is that the seed from the tree, as it falls, is going to drop right underneath of that parent tree, and then that's where it's going to sprout. So why do I have a clump of all of these plants in one area? The reason why I have a clump of these plants in one area is because that's where the seeds fell. They didn't get dispersed very far from the original parent. Clumped distribution, most common distribution pattern for not just animals, plants also. And again, the clumping, if we're talking about plants, very often they're going to be clustered around a resource, and for plants, that resource is water. Animals can be clumped for other reasons. A lot of times we're talking about prey, they're going to be clumped for safety. But they can also be clumped around a resource. If there's a big patch of grass over here, and there's a big, swath of desert back there, they're going to be in the grass. They're going to be clumped around this resource. And a resource could be shelter. A resource could definitely be shelter if we're talking about animals. Next is the least common one, the most rare, and that is random. The reason why random is the most rare is because it implies that no part of the environment is any better than any other part of the environment. And that's almost never the case. There's always going to be better places to be. There's going to be more food availability, there's going to be more water availability, there's going to be better shelter. If we're talking about plants, again, more water. With plants, you also would want to talk about the amount of availability of sunlight. So random says that there's no reason why no order behind where organisms are dispersed throughout the environment. That's just very rare. An example would be like dandelions in your yard. Your yard is a fairly uniform habitat as far as a dandelion is concerned. So dandelions that in fact are randomly spread throughout your yard. But first, is your yard a natural habitat? And the answer is simply no. A well-kept, even a poorly kept yard is not a very natural habitat. Random dispersion pattern. There's no rhyme or reason. Some are very close, some are much farther away from each other. No rhyme or reason as to how they are dispersed throughout the environment. And again, very rare in nature, not common at all. Our last one is actually uncommon, but that doesn't mean rare. Again, the rarest one is random. Nearly uniform is uncommon. I wouldn't say it's common, but it is uncommon, which means it's not unheard of. It does happen. And this is where individuals are relatively the same distance apart. And a great example of this is fire ant mounds. Great time to look for fire ant mounds is in early spring and late fall, when most of the grass has turned brown, but specifically around the fire ant mounds, they'll be nice, bright and green. And so when you're driving and you drive by a pasture and you look out and you see these green dots everywhere, those are fire ant mounds. Fire ant mounds are fairly evenly distributed throughout a pasture like that. And the reason why they're fairly evenly distributed is because, number one, when you see that big pasture full of fire ant mounds, you think it's all just one big colony, and that's not true. They are separate colonies, and number one, and number two, they don't like each other. So they don't cooperate, and they're going to fight over territory. Second, an ant can only walk so far in a day. And because they're an ant, it's not that far. So they're going to be able to go out so far to forage for food and then come back again, and they're going to have to guard against the other ant mounds. Remember, an ant can only walk so far in a day, and they don't like each other. So they've got a border that they will patrol, a territory that the ants themselves will defend. And because all ants are the same size, fire ants, they're all the same size, those areas are going to be pretty much the same. So as we look out here, we see that the ant mounds are fairly evenly distributed throughout the environment because, again, the mounds don't work with each other. They don't like each other. They will fight for food. Number two, an ant can only walk so far in a day and will only patrol a certain area to guard it against other mounds.